I was 19 the winter the woman came down out of the storm, and I am old enough now that most of the men who could call me a liar are in the ground, so I will tell it the way it was. My brother Asa had not spoken a soft word in 2 years. Rachel had been gone that long, taken by a fever that came up the valley in 3 days and was finished with her on the fourth. And after we buried her under the cottonwood by Wintering Creek, Asa packed his heart away the same as a man packs a dead woman's dresses into a trunk, and he did not open it again. He worked. He worked like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. He cut wood we did not need and mended fence the snow would only bury and rode the line of our range in weather that would have killed a softer man. And at night he sat with his coffee going cold and his eyes on the fire, and said nothing at all. I learned to be quiet alongside him. A younger brother learns the shape of an older brother's silence the way he learns the trail home. We had a cabin under Dovetail Ridge, in the high sweetgrass country, where winter shut the pass by November and did not open it again until the creek broke up in April. For 5 months a year we were our own country, Asa and me, 2 men and a stove and a barn full of stock, and the white silence pressing down on the roof like a hand. The storm that brought her was the worst I ever saw. It came on a clear afternoon, that is the way of the bad ones, and by dark the wind was a living thing throwing itself against the door, and the snow was not falling so much as it was being driven sideways through the world. We brought the horses close and packed the chinking and let the fire roar, and I remember Asa standing at the one window with the lamp behind him, looking out at nothing, because there was nothing to see. Just white and the dark behind the white. She knocked near midnight. I would not have heard it over the wind, but Asa did. Asa heard things the rest of us missed. It was a thing about him, and he turned from the window with his head cocked like a hound. Then it came again, 3 slow knocks, the knock of a fist that has almost no strength left in it. He had the door open before I was out of my chair. She fell across the threshold into the firelight, and the snow blew in around her in a white cloud, and for a moment I could not tell what she was. A bundle of frozen hides. A drift come to life. Then Asa knelt and turned her over, and I saw a woman's face, gray with cold, her lashes white with ice, her lips the color of a bruise. There was blood frozen down the side of her deerskin dress, dark and old from some wound at her hip, and her hands when Asa took them were stiff as carved wood. "Bar the door," Asa said. It was the first order he'd given me in a week. We got her to the fire. We got the frozen outer hides off her and a dry blanket around her, and Asa rubbed her hands between his own rough palms while I melted snow and got broth warming, and the whole time the woman watched us. That was the thing that struck me. Half dead as she was, her eyes never closed. She watched my brother's hands on hers with a still, measuring look, like a woman deciding whether the men who'd taken her in were the kind she'd have to fight before morning. She was Lakota. I knew that much from her dress and her bearing, and I knew it more surely when she finally spoke, a low string of words, careful, none of which Asa or I understood. Asa shook his head to show he had no part of her tongue. She studied his face a moment, then nodded once like a person filing away a fact. And there it was between us from the first hour, a wall neither of us could climb, 3 people in one small room and not one word we could pass across. I will not pretend the strangeness of it was small. There were men in our country then who would have put her back out in the storm rather than share a roof with a Lakota, and there were men who'd have done worse than that, and I'd be lying if I said the thought of how the valley would talk did not cross my mind. I was 19. But Asa, who had not done a gentle thing in 2 years, lifted that woman like she was made of glass and laid her on Rachel's old bed in the corner. The bed he had not let me so much as sit on since the burying, and pulled Rachel's quilt up over her, and stood looking down at her a long moment with something working behind his eyes that I had not seen since the cottonwood. "A roof's a roof," he said when he saw me watching. "Storm don't care who she is, neither do I." That was Asa's whole creed, said plain. Our father had said it before him. You do not turn a soul out into the killing cold, not for any reason under heaven, because the cold is the enemy of every man and woman alive, and it makes no distinctions, so neither will we. I had heard it my whole life. That night was the first time I saw what it cost a man to mean it. She was 3 days getting her strength back, and they were strange days. We could not ask her name, so we did not have one for her. We could not ask where her people were, or how she'd come to be alone in such a country in such a season, or what had cut her hip. We could only do and let her watch us do it and try to read her face. She would not let me near the wound at first, turned from me with a flat warning look, but she let us say after a fashion, and what's more she directed him. She could not say a word he understood, but she could take his hand and move it firm to show him where to press and where not to. And she made a poultice herself from the dried plants in a little pouch she'd carried inside her dress through all of it. And she showed him by signs what to fetch from the snow and the wood pile. And between the two of them, without a shared word, they cleaned and dressed that wound better than the doctor down in the valley could have done it. I had thought of her those first hours as something we had saved. By the third day I had stopped thinking that. You do not save a person who is, plainly, the most capable hand in the room. We had given her a roof. Everything else she was doing herself and teaching us as she went. It was the fourth night that she sang. The wind had finally quit. The silence after a storm like that is a thing you can feel in your chest. We'd eaten, and the fire was low and good, and Asa was at his place by the hearth with his coffee, locked up in himself the way he always was, and the woman sat on the edge of Rachel's bed wrapping her healing hands in a strip of cloth. And she began, very low, to sing. I cannot tell you what the words were. They were her own tongue, and they have stayed her own tongue in my memory all these years. I never asked her to translate that song, and she never offered. But I can tell you it was the sound of grief that had made its peace. It rose and held and fell, slow as snowmelt, and it filled that little cabin clear up to the ridgepole. And it was the most human sound I had heard in 2 years of my brother's silence. I looked at Asa. He had set his coffee down. He was sitting very still, and the firelight was on his face, and there were tears standing in my hard brother's eyes, the first since we'd lowered Rachel into the cold ground. He did not wipe them. He let them sit there and shine, and he kept his eyes on the woman, and when the song was done, the cabin was so quiet I could hear the snow settling off the roof. "Sing it again," Asa said. His voice came out cracked. She could not understand him, but she understood the look on his face because that needs no tongue, and she sang it again. After that the songs were how we lived. It is a long thing, a winter in the high country, when the pass is shut and the days are short and a man has only the same 2 faces to look at across the same small table. It can turn brothers mean. But that winter we had a third face, and we had her voice, and the voice changed everything about how the time passed. She sang while she worked, and she worked all the time. That woman, she could not abide an idle hand. She showed me a better way to set a snare than I had ever known, and by spring we were eating rabbit and grouse we'd have gone without. She found something wrong with the way we'd been doctoring a lame horse and put it right in 2 days. She took over the bread and made it better than either of us could, and she did all of it humming or singing, low, under her breath, so that the cabin was never silent again. And slowly, the way ice goes off a pond from the edges in, so slow you cannot catch it happening, Asa came back to life. It started with the language. They built the 2 of them out of nothing. A word of hers for fire, a word of his, both of them laughing, Asa laughing, when one of them got the others wrong. She taught him the sign for snow and the sign for horse and the sign for cold, and he taught her the English. And by deep winter they could pass a whole simple thought back and forth, hers to his and his to hers, and watching them do it was like watching 2 people build a bridge across a river 1 stone at a time, each stone carried out from a different bank. We learned her name in this way, somewhere in the heart of the winter. She put her hand to her own breast and said it, Winona, and made the sign she'd taught us for firstborn, eldest daughter. Asa said it back to her, careful, and she corrected him, and he said it again, and she nodded. Winona. After that, the cabin had her name in it, and a place that has a person's name in it is a different place than one that does not. The thing I want to set down plainly, because the world then would not have set it down and the world now might forget it. Winona was never ours, and never beholden, and never less than the equal of any soul in that valley. She stayed because she chose to stay. The wound at her hip and the shut pass made leaving a death sentence, and she was too wise to die for pride. But inside that, she was free in every way a person can be in a one-room cabin, and Hassan never once forgot it. He asked by sign and broken word before he did a thing near her. He gave her Rachel's bed and built himself a bunk by the door and never crossed the space between without her leave. When the valley thawed in her, when she began to laugh, and to tease Joby the green boy, and to sing the brighter songs as well as the sorrowing ones, it was because she had decided in her own time that this was a roof a woman could be safe under. She decided it. We did not earn it by right. We earned it the slow way, the only way it can truly be earned, which is by showing a person day after day after day what kind of men they have fallen in with. The fever came in February. It came up out of me, of all the rotten luck. I went down hard, the way Rachel had, and I will not soon forget the look that crossed my brother's face when he felt the heat coming off my forehead. He had buried one already. I watched him decide in about 1 second that he was not going to bury another, and then I watched him be helpless, because there is nothing a strong man can do against a fever but wait and pray and lose. Winona did not wait. Winona went to work. I have only pieces of those days. The fever took the rest, but I have pieces, and in every one of them she is there. Her cool hands, her low singing going on and on through the nights, the sorrowing songs now, the ones that had made my brother weep, except I understood at last that they were not only sorrow, they were the sound a person makes to call another person back from a long way off. She made me drink bitter things I'd not have taken from anyone else. She kept me cool, and then she kept me warm. And on the third night, the night the fever broke, I came up out of the dark, and the first thing I saw was Winona's face above mine, gray with exhaustion, singing. And behind her, in the firelight, my brother Asa on his knees with his hands pressed to his mouth and his shoulders shaking, watching her save the last family he had. When I was strong enough to sit up, a week on, I found the two of them changed toward each other. Nothing said, nothing a younger brother could point to. But Asa would be splitting kindling and Winona would come past with an armful of snow to melt, and their eyes would catch and hold a half-second too long, and the both of them would look away with the smallest softening in their hard, weathered faces. And I knew. A boy of 19 does not know much, but he knows that. It was after the fever that Asa gave her the hymn. We had a way by then of trading songs across the fire. She'd sing one of hers, then look at me or Asa to bring one of ours, and mostly Asa stayed out of it because the only songs Asa had were Rachel's songs, and he had locked those up with everything else. But one night Winona sang something quiet and questioning, and at the end she looked straight at my brother and waited, plain as a spoken request. Now yours. Asa was quiet a long time. Then he started, low and rough, no kind of singer at all, the hymn Rachel used to sing over the wash water. I had not heard it in 2 years. I had to look at the fire so neither of them would see my face. He got through it somehow, all the verses in that cracked, unmusical voice, and when he was done he sat there emptied out, and Winona did not say anything, could not have, in any tongue we shared, but she reached across the little space between the bed and the hearth and laid her healing hand flat on the back of my brother's hand, and left it there. And Asa turned his palm up under hers and held on like a drowning man holds a rope. That was the whole of it that night. A held hand by a low fire, two people who had each buried a country's worth of grief, finding out they did not have to carry it alone. But I have lived a long life since and been a married man myself for most of it. And I will tell you, there has never been a wedding I stood up at that meant more than that one held hand in that Snowden cabin meant. The rest only made plain what was settled that night. Spring is slow to make up its mind in the high country, but it came. The creek began to talk under the ice. The big drifts went gray and sank. And one morning in the thaw, Asa stood out in the yard a long time looking up at the pass, where the snow had pulled back enough that a careful rider could get through, and I knew what he was thinking, and I dreaded it, and I was proud of him for it, both at once. That night he sat across from Winona and told her, by sign, by their patched-together words, by drawing in the ashes, that the pass was open, that her people would be looking for her, that he would take her to them. I watched her face while he said it. I will never forget it. There was a flash of something, fear, maybe, or the simple animal not wanting of a person who has found a safe place and does not want to leave it, and then she mastered it, and she nodded, because she was a woman of duty before she was anything, and her band was her band, and her mother was likely grieving her for dead. She would go home. Of course she would go home. Asa would not have had her if she were the kind of woman who wouldn't. But before she nodded, in that first unguarded flash, I saw her look at my brother in a way that told me everything about how the spring was going to end. It took us 9 days to find her people. Winona knew the country once we got down out of the high valley, and she led, we followed her, 2 white men trailing a Lakota woman across her own land, which is the only fit way that journey could have been made. She found the sign of her band's spring camp and read it the way Asa read weather. And on the 9th day we came down a long grass slope toward the smoke of their lodges by a river, and a knot of riders came out to meet us hard and fast, and there was a bad few minutes there where I thought we had come all that way to be killed in sight of the finish. It was Winona who stopped it. She rode out ahead of us alone, and she called out, and a cry went up from the camp that I felt in my teeth, and then there were people running, an old woman among them who Winona slid off her horse to catch up in her arms, and the whole hard knot of riders went loose with the joy of it. Her mother. They had grieved her for dead all winter, and here she came down the spring slope alive, and the camp came apart with the gladness of it. We were a long time among her people. They did not have to make us welcome, 2 strangers of the race that was, even then, pushing in on every side of their country, and the fact that they did, that they fed us and heard us out and let Winona tell the winter's whole tale to a circle of listening faces, was a gift Asa never once spoke of lightly for the rest of his days. Winona told it all, I have no doubt. I saw the old men's eyes go to my brother more than once, weighing him, and at the end of the telling an old man, a leader among them, came and stood in front of Asa a long while and then put out his hand in the white man's way, having learned somewhere it was the gesture we set store by. And Asa took it, and that was that. We had not earned anything by right there either. We had been judged by people with every reason in the world to judge us hard and let through. We stayed near a week, and in that week I watched my brother and Winona among her own people in the daylight with no shut pass forcing anything, and I saw that what had grown in the cabin grew the same out here in the open freely. They walked out together along the river. She showed him her country. He was clumsy and careful and plain, and she laughed at him, and he let her. And on our last evening I saw them standing apart from the camp with the sunset on them, and Asa said something, and Winona was quiet, and then she put her hand flat on his chest the way she'd put it on his hand by the fire, and that was her answer. But she did not come with us when we left. I want that understood because it is the heart of the thing. Asa did not carry her off. When we rode out for our own country, Winona stayed with her people, and Asa rode away with nothing settled but a promise, and I thought, fool that I was, that we had seen the last of her, and I grieved it the whole long ride home. It was near a month later, with summer coming on green and the valley loud with birds, that I was mending the corral and heard a horse on the trail and looked up, and there she came down out of the pass, Winona, riding easy, with 2 of her kinsmen escorting her partway and a pack-horse behind, having made the journey on her own decision and her own legs, having gone home and thought it over among her own and chosen freely in her own time to come back to the hard rancher under Dovetail Ridge. Asa came out of the barn and stood in the yard and watched her ride in, and he did not move and he did not speak, and his face, my hard, buried, stone-hearted brother's face, broke open into something I had not seen on it in all my life, not even before Rachel died. The two of them did not run to each other. That was not their way. She rode up slow and stopped her horse in front of him and looked down at him, and Asa looked up at her, and then she swung down off that horse into the dust of our yard and stood close to him, and he put his rough hand up against the side of her face, the way a man touches the one thing he was sure he'd never have again. "You came back," he said. She had English enough by then. "I chose," she said, and those were the truest 2 words ever spoke in that valley. They were married in the late summer in both ways by a circuit preacher who came up grumbling about the distance, and before that, the realer way among her people by their own right, which Asa traveled down to her country to stand up in on her terms in her place, as was right. She kept her name. She was Winona Holloway to the valley and Winona to her people, and she never once in all the years let either half of her go for the other. She doctored half the high country before she was through. They came up from 3 valleys over when the doctor failed them. And she sang in that cabin every day of her life. And she raised a flock of dark-eyed children who were the toughest and gentlest and most stubborn people I have ever known, my nieces and nephews, and who carried both their mother's tongue and their father's in their mouths and were the richer for it. And Asa Holloway, who had packed his heart away in a trunk and meant to keep it there till they laid him by the cottonwood. I watched the cold come out of him over the years the way it had gone out of him over that first winter, slow, from the edges in. Until by the end he was a man who laughed easy and wept easy and held his wife's hand at the supper table in front of God and his grown children and did not care who saw. He lived to be old. He died in his bed in that cabin in the deep of a winter, with the snow coming down soft outside and Winona singing low beside him, the sorrowing song that is not only sorrow, the one that calls a person back, except this time it was not to call him back. This time it was to walk him out. I was there. I held his other hand. He went easy. I am the last of them now. I have outlived my hard brother and his good wife and most of their children, and there is no one left to tell it but me, so I have told it. People want a lesson off a story like this one. I do not have a tidy one, but I have thought all my long life about that first night, the wind and the 3 slow knocks, and my brother crossing that cabin to open the door without one moment's pause to ask whose face would be on the other side of it. "A roof's a roof," he said. "Storm don't care who she is. Neither do I." There was a whole wide world out past our past that cared a great deal who she was, and built its walls high on the strength of caring. My brother's whole creed against all of it was that the cold makes no distinctions, so a decent man won't either, and that the thing on the far side of every wall a person builds, whether the wall is grief or fear or the color of a face, is most often just another soul out in the weather, knocking, with almost no strength left in the fist. He opened the door. That is the whole of it. He opened the door, and a woman came in out of the storm singing, and she thawed everything in that cabin the long winter couldn't reach. I hope wherever they have gone she is singing still. I hope he is listening. I expect he is. He always heard things the rest of us missed.